Let's look at the graph of the inverse variation parent function, also called the reciprocal function or the rational parent function. So we're looking at the graph of f of x equals 1 over x. So let's create an xy table. Let's choose some x values and we'll find their corresponding y values. So for x is -8, y is 1 over -8. For x is -4, y equals 1 over -4. For x equals -2, y equals 1 over -2. For x equals -1, y equals 1 over -1, which is -1. For x is -1/2, y equals 1 over -1/2, which is -2. For x is -1/4, y is 1 over -1/4, which equals -4. For x equals -1/8, y equals 1 over -1/8, which equals -8. For x equals 0, y equals 1 over 0, which is undefined. So we do not have a point where x equals 0. For x equals 1/8, y equals 1 over 1/8, which is 8. For x equals 1/4, y equals 1 over 1/4, which is 4. For x equals 1/2, y equals 1 over 1/2, which is 2. For x equals 1, y equals 1 over 1, which is 1. For x equals 2, y equals 1 over 2, or 1/2. For x equals 4, y equals 1 over 4, or 1/4. And for x equals 8, y equals 1 over 8, or 1/8. Okay, so let's plot the corresponding coordinates. So where I'm going to go up by ones, where every tick line is 1. I don't want to put the tick lines because it is going to be hard enough to see some of these points as it is. So I've got 1 through 8, -1 through -8 on the x-axis, 1 through 8 on the y-axis, and -1 through -8 on the y-axis. Our first point or coordinate is -8, -1/8, which is right below the x-axis. It's very close to the x-axis, but not touching it, and right below it. And we've got the point -4, -1/4, which is also right below the x-axis, but a little bit farther away. Now we've got the point -2, -1/2, and the point -1, -1, and the point -1/2, -2, and the point -1/4, -4. Now we're getting close to the y-axis, but we're still to the left of it. And -1/8, -8. And then we don't have a point at x is 0. And now we'll have a point at 1/8, 8. So we jump up here. And we'll have a point at 1/4, 4. And a point at 1/2, 2. And a point at 1, 1. And a point at 2, 1/2. And a point at 4, 1/4. And a point at 8, 1/8. And when I sketch in the curve, I get a branch down here in quadrant 3 and a branch up here in quadrant 1. And the ends are approaching the x and the y axes, but they are not touching the axes. So we do the x-axis. I'm drawing it in as a dotted line here because it's not part of the graph, but it is an attribute of the graph and it helps us draw the graph. And also the y-axis, dotted line. And so here on the x-axis, we have a horizontal asymptote. And the equation of our horizontal asymptote is y equals 0, which is the equation of the x-axis. And as x approaches infinity, we see that the curve approaches y equals 0, but it never actually gets there. And over here, as x approaches negative infinity, the curve also approaches y equals 0. So the y-axis is a vertical asymptote here, as the equation x equals 0. And we could say as y approaches infinity for our curve, the curve approaches the line x equals 0. And down here, we can see that as y approaches negative infinity, the curve approaches the line x equals 0. So our curve is not going to touch our horizontal asymptote y equals 0 or our vertical asymptote x equals 0. And it actually jumps to a different quadrant. Like it's not connected. These two branches are not connected. Okay, let's summarize some attributes or features of our reciprocal function or inverse variation parent function. Our domain, sometimes we'll just define the domain by stating what the restriction is. Here, x cannot equal 0. Or in set notation, we could write the set of all x's such that x does not equal 0. Or in interval notation, we could write from negative infinity to 0, union 0 to infinity. For the range, our restriction is y does not equal 0. Or in set notation, we could write the set of all y's such that y does not equal 0. Or in interval notation, we could write the negative infinity to 0, union 0 to positive infinity. In terms of symmetry, we don't have symmetry over the x-axis or the y-axis, but we do have rotational symmetry about the origin. If we were to rotate this graph 180 degrees, we would be looking at the identical graph that we started with. We have a vertical asymptote at x equals 0, and we have a horizontal asymptote at y equals 0. These are both attributes. And because of these asymptotes, we don't have any x or y intercepts. So our graph does not cross or touch the x or y axis. And this is a summary of the attributes of the reciprocal function, also known as the inverse variation parent function.